In this tutorial we're going to learn how to make a standard trance pluck sound. So to start off we're going to load up an ES2 synthesizer in Logic, but any synthesizer that can have at least 3 oscillators with saw waves will be perfectly fine for this technique. So to start with, we've programmed in some chords and edited the velocities of certain notes, so some are going to be louder than others once we set up a few things on the synth. And that's our basic little pluck progression. So we're going to start by loading up the tutorial setting and loading up analog saw initialize, and then we're just going to change these routings to all to off at the moment, so that no modulation is happening at all, and we've just got one saw oscillator. Change the filter side over to filter 1, and there's our basic raw tone. So we're going to start adding in some additional oscillators, bring in the mix to roughly 30% each, somewhere in the middle there as the ballpark. Now each oscillator is going to be set to the same octave, but we're going to slightly offset the detuning of the cents against one another. So on this I'm going to go to plus 13 cents for the first one, minus 6 for the second, and minus 2 for the third. Something around that range will do, and we then should end up with a slightly wider sounding saw patch. We're also going to increase the voices up to as high as it'll go. So that's 32 at the moment, but we're actually also going to use the unison as well, so that will diminish that and reduce that to 16 voices in unison mode. So that's just more oscillators stacked up and detuned against one another to get a thicker texture. So let's have a listen to that now. So that's sounding good already. That's sounding relatively close to the sort of final end product as it is. So the next thing we're going to tackle to get that typical trance pluck sound is we're actually going to reshape the amplitude envelope. We're going to change the ADSR envelope, and we're going to bring the decay down to around 25%. It's also got a milliseconds readout on there, so it ends up being about 50 or 60 milliseconds for the decay. Going to keep the attack at 0. We're going to pull down the sustain to 0 because we don't want it sustaining, we want it to be a very percussive, quick sound, and we're going to have the release at around 25% as well. So that's now changed our amplitude envelope, which should make this a bit more clicky and percussive. And next we're going to change the cutoff filter. So we're going to pull that down to a little bit less than 50%, somewhere in around there. And we're also going to turn the resonance up to about 60 as well, 60%. So that's sounding a bit closer to the trance pluck type sound already. And next we're going to just add in a few modulation routings. So this first one, we want the amplitude of the sound being controlled by the velocity of the notes. So we can add a bit more expression and articulation to it. And we're going to have that change by a positive amount, but only by about 50%. I'm going to use in tandem the filter cutoff 1. So that's that control there. And we're going to have that triggered again by the velocity. And we're going to use a positive amount there by about 40%. And then finally we're going to control some of that cutoff filter with the envelope control from envelope 2. And we're going to set that to attack at 0, decay at roughly about 50%. It's about 700 milliseconds on this synth. Sustain to 0, and the release to about 25%. Phase that was about 60 odd milliseconds. we're going to increase that slightly up to about a third of the way. Positive modulation. So there's our basic kind of raw synth tone for the pluck sound, and after that a lot of this technique is actually based around the insert processing. So we're going to add some chorus with our Scanner Vibrato plugin selected to chorus mode. We're going to use chorus 3, and we're going to have the depth up, not full, but about a quarter of the way up. We're going to offset the left and right channels so they're detuned at slightly different rates, which will kind of add an extra sort of thickness to the sound. And then the next thing we're going to do is add in some digital delays, and you can use any delay unit, but I've decided to use a third-party one because I just, as a personal preference, I prefer it to the stereo delay within Logic. So there we've got line 6 pod elements using one of the delay pedals from there. You can use any, it doesn't have to be a digital delay like this, it could be a third-party unit, or it could even be some of the delays from the pedal board as well. That would work just as well. And then next is probably the most important part of this sound, is finding an appropriate reverb for the sound. So spending some time auditioning different reverbs and finding a really, really good one that you like is definitely worth doing for this technique. So once we have that Space Designer in, we're almost sort of home and dry really. So we're clipping a little bit on the channel so we can reduce that there. Might also reduce the volume on the plugin itself. So that's a little bit better. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually duplicate this and layer it up with a additional synthesizer. And actually all we're going to do is just copy this synth across to a new ES2. So we're just going to copy the preset, paste it over here. So we're going to open up the color filter a bit more, and we're also going to change the detuning. So we're going to go in opposition. So that was plus 13, so we'll go maybe minus 10. That was minus 6, so let's go plus 5. That was minus 2, so let's go plus 2. And this will create some extra thickening of the texture when these two synths are aggregated and mixed back together. So let's have a little listen how this sounds. I'm just going to slightly change some of the settings on the amplitude ADSR envelope, and we're going to add in some different inserts as well. So we're going to start by adding in some overdrive. And then we're going to use the enveloper, which is essentially a transient designer. And on this, we're just going to increase the gain about 70% for the first 40 or so milliseconds. And then we're going to reduce the time of that envelope as well, and reduce that gain. So we're just going to make it a more percussive, tighter sound. So you can hear there that the transient of that sound has been reshaped with that enveloper. And then we're just going to copy over that Space Designer preset and maybe make it a touch drier than the other one. And now we're going to mix the two against one another. And to separate out these two sounds in our stereo field, we're just going to offset each channel of that first delayed and reverberant one by a few samples here, and we'll offset the left and right channels so it'll kind of use the harsh effect that we've used in previous tutorials to create an artificial widening of the stereo image. So that's starting to sound pretty trancey and pretty good now. And what we've done already is we've sent out the outputs of those two tracks to bus 2. And we've created a plucks bus here where we'll also add in some sidechain compression. And this plugin here, by Vengeance Sound, is a really intelligent sidechain compressor where you can actually redraw the envelope of that compression, and you don't even need to actually sidechain it against anything. It will just automatically duck as if a kick drum was already triggering it, and you can redraw that envelope to change how you want the signal to pump in time with the kick drum. So let's just get ourselves a little kick drum here. So let's have a listen to this with the sidechain compression off and on, and we'll see that it starts ducking out and changing the rhythms against the kick drum by ducking out some of the 8th notes and some of the little 16th note fills. So to finish off the tutorial, let's have a little listen at how that pluck sound together actually works in the context of the type of trance that you might hear it in.